Good evening, brothers and sisters and young people, and also to those of us who are probably not wearing a mask and at home. Hopefully you're breathing easy. We are here too as well, under a bit of sufferance, but it's very nice to all be together in whatever form we are on our midweek Bible class, and Brother Brian is to continue his series on the Emmanuel prophecies, which we'll look forward to. So he's chosen hymn 281 to be our opening hymn of meditation. So, of course, we'll, as we are at the moment, reading through those words and then having them played, and then we'll commence with an opening prayer. So, hymn 281, Light of them that sit in darkness, rise and shine, thy blessings bring. Light to lighten all the Gentiles, rise with healing in thy wing. To thy brightness let all kings and nations come. Let the Gentiles now adoring idols vain as wood and stone, come and worshipping before him, serve the living God alone. Let thy glory fill the earth as floods the sea. Thou to whom all power is given, speak the word at thy command. Let the law go forth from Zion, spread thy word from land to land. Lord, arouse thee, let God's will be all in all. like to stand now, we'll open our evening with prayer. Our glorious Father in heaven, we're very grateful that we have been called to know of thee and thy ways, and particularly, Father, to know and to freely read from thy word of truth. We live in very troubled times, but we have a weekly opportunity to renew our thoughts around the things of thee by meeting together as we do here tonight. We're very thankful for this. We're very aware of those around this country and around the world who can't meet as freely as we do, whatever the circumstances. So we pray that you'll help all of us, both here in the hall and those who are joining us online, to benefit from the things that we hear and think about tonight. Please be with our brother Brian and help him to recall the things that he's prepared and to build us up all towards thy kingdom. It's in Jesus Christ's name that we ask this prayer now. Amen. All right, well, our introductory reading is Isaiah chapter 8, and Brother Brad will lead us in that. Thanks.
Reading together from Isaiah chapter 8. Moreover, the Lord said unto me, Take thee a great roll, and write in it with a man's pen concerning Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And I took unto me faithful witnesses to record, Uriah the priest, and Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah. And I went unto the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Lord to me, Call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, My father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. And the Lord spake also unto me again, saying, Forasmuch as this people refuseth the waters of Shiloah that go softly, and rejoice in Rezin and Remaliah's son, now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria, and all his glory. And he shall come up over all his channels, and go over all his banks. And he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. Associate yourselves, O ye people, and ye shall be broken in pieces. And give ear, all ye of far countries, gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken in pieces. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand, for God is with us. For the Lord spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people, saying, Say ye not a confederacy, to all them to whom this people shall say, a confederacy. Neither fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. Sanctify the Lord of hosts himself, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offence to both houses of Israel, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. And I will wait upon the Lord, that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. When they shall say unto you, Seek unto them that have familiar spirits, and unto wizards that peep and that mutter, should not a people seek unto their God, for the living to the dead? To the law and to the testimony, If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And they shall pass through it, hardly bestead and hungry. And it shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves, and curse their king and their God, and look upward. And they shall look unto the earth, and behold trouble and darkness, dimness of anguish, and they shall be driven to darkness.
Thanks kindly, Brother Brad. So we'll now invite Brother Brian forward to speak to us tonight.
My dear brethren and sisters and our young people, it was said that we are privileged people because we can come to such studies as Isaiah, for example. And you know, we don't want to underestimate that, whoever might say it, because it's just so true, isn't it? We enjoy an understanding of the scriptures that is really quite unique, I suppose, in most parts of the world today. And yet we come and we just take it for granted as though it's just our normal lot. How blessed we are. And we love it. We love our studies from the scriptures, and we love to come to know more about them. On Saturday afternoon, when we had our prophecy day, which was really a delightful day, very, very good work done and very inspiring in all three parts. And at the end of the day, you could just feel that having not been together for quite some time, we haven't been able to get together, have we? Much at all. Well, there was a couple of hundred there, and there was many others listening in other ways. And I think one of the predominant feelings of the 200 or 300 people who were there was that it was just a very heartwarming thing to be there and to enjoy the knowledge of God at such a level, and to know that that is the truth. Very blessed indeed. Well, Isaiah's not letting up on us. He doesn't think we've had too much of an innings at all. He is Isaiah, and he is uniquely interesting in the way that he puts his material together. And I sympathise, though, with those who might be looking at it for the first time. I encourage you to really work hard on it, because it's just a sensationally interesting book once we start to get a hold of it. But in the chapter that we dealt with, or most of that chapter that we dealt with, chapter 7 last time, then the gracious offer of God that the king could be given an indication of God being with him if he wanted to. And in his belligerence and stupidity, for he was a very, very foolish king, he scorned that very precious opportunity. And so, because of that attitude that he had towards the blessing that God offered, the last little bit in Isaiah 7, I won't do it with it all, but it's just saying, well, this is your reward for your lack of thoughtfulness and appreciation for the special opportunity that God gave you. You know, it would have been an amazing thing, wouldn't it, if he had have accepted the sign, and you would have had the feature of this king, this Ahaz, is spiritually a ratbag. There's nothing else you can call him than that is a very evil man, cynical, unholy, unappreciative. But if he had been wise enough to take the opportunity, do you know it would have been he who was told that a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. Who was going to announce that? He was being given the privilege. Is there anything finer in the promises that God had made? Well, something very similar in the promises to David. But to think that that might have come to the ears of this Ahaz is just amazing. What an opportunity, what a privilege, despite all that he was and all that he would be. Well, the reply to that is given in these three verses, 17, 18 and 19. And it says in those verses, chapter 7, Yahweh shall bring upon thee and upon thy people and upon thy father's house days that thou hast not come, days that have not come. From the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, even the king of Assyria. You won't accept the promise that I made to you, a staggering promise. Well, what you get in its place is the king of Assyria, a cruel and vile man, and known throughout the world because of his work in the field of battle. But certainly you wouldn't want him coming to replace that promise. And again in verse 18, it shall come to pass in that day that Yahweh shall hiss for the fly that is in the uttermost parts of the rivers of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. In other words, those places that have lots of little creatures that are a darn nuisance, they are linked together again with Assyria. And instead of having the opportunity and blessing and honour from that, you have a country that's full of little creatures that are a nuisance to your daily life. And you note that Assyria has now been introduced to the situation. Just so they've got this clear in the mind about the confusion of the kingdoms, I thought if we just put that, it's up, isn't it? You all know and I don't. Okay. Yeah, I thought it would be helpful just to see that, because where it says in verse 1 of Isaiah 7, it came to pass in the days of Ahaz. Well, he's the king of Judah, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. Uzziah was that very active and powerful king that was there for the second longest time of any king among the kings of Judah. Well, that Rezin, the king of Syria, if you've got a little piece of paper, just write it down. It makes such a difference to memory, doesn't it? Rezin was the king of Syria. And Pekah, the son of Remaliah, he was of the 10 tribes, which are here being called Ephraim. So the king of that part of it was Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel. Now, you can see that very clearly on that simple map. Here's Judah, where it always was. And above that is the kingdom, we're calling it the kingdom of the 10 tribes, because the record refers to it in that way. And above that is Syria off to the right. So Syria has made an agreement with Israel, I'm just calling it in its more usual name, with the 10 tribes of Israel, Syria has made an agreement with Israel, which excludes Judah, doesn't it? It's a deliberate division of the people of Israel, a very significant division. And because of that, Judah has got no brothers. Judah's by herself. And it's a bad time in Israel. And that concept leads to other further involvement, because beyond Syria is Assyria. And she will take opportunity because of the inability of these two brothers to get on with their calling that they had under God. So that might be helpful to get the picture. It's probably oversimplified, but it's in that new atlas that we've been able to get recently, and it's very, very good. Is that all clear? So we can't see Assyria on there, but she's up further north and out. And she will come into the picture. And verse 17 and 18 have introduced her. You don't want to respect that which I have promised you? Well, you'll get Assyria instead. That's the sense of those verses. We're coming over to chapter 8. I'm going to leave those verses the end of chapter 6, the end of chapter 7. I see there's a third reference you might notice in verse 20 of chapter 7. So that's 3 references to Syria, and she hadn't even been in the equation until that time. But now the fly and the bee are going to come, and they're going to be like a whole rampage of flies and bees causing trouble. And Assyria is going to be the one that is so figured as we read in verse 20. The same day shall the Lord shave with a razor that is hired, namely by them beyond the river, by the king of Assyria, mentioned yet again. And you'll find that Assyria comes right into the picture in chapter 8, though she had not been in chapter 7 until we got to verse 17. So the extra factor is up there on the right, and you can't see it on our map, but that will come and bring vengeance by God for the attitude that they had. So in chapter 8 and verse 1, it opens this way. Moreover, Yahweh said unto me, take thee a great roll, and write in it with a man's pen, concerning Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And I took unto me faithful witnesses to record it, Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jerebekiah. And in verse 3, we have the beginnings of Maher-shalal-hash-baz. It was to be the prophet's second son. Verse 3, I went unto the prophetess, and she conceived and bare a son. Then said the Lord to me, call his name Maher-shalal-hash-baz. And the essential idea of Maher-shalal-hash-baz, if you say it enough times you get it, is that it was going to be something of force and power that was coming. The impression of the word was that it's coming, and it's coming soon, and it's certainly coming. That is the sense of Maher-shalal-hash-baz. When it says write it in a man's pen, it's a little bit, the Hebrew is a little bit, I think, obtuse in the AV. But the sense of it is that there's going to be something by which they will advertise this new event, and it's going to be written in a man's roll. A nephosh is the word for man, which means a poor man. In other words, this is going to be written on this message, and in that way it would make itself suitable for the average or the poor person of Israel. But it was going to come. That's the great point of Maher-shalal-hash-baz. So it was a second sign, and to see the point of that, we notice in verse 2 that he took two people who were to be faithful witnesses of the fact that the prophet backed that. He was responsible, through his wife, for that coming. And he wanted people to know that this wasn't just another child that might happen to be born, but these two eminent people were there to witness the fact that the prophet was with his wife and that in the due time this child would be born, and it was certainly a child of the prophet. So its authority would therefore be certain because he was involved. And the two people that were chosen were very eminent people. One's called Uriah the priest, and he was a very eminent person. He was probably the one that was responsible for training the work that brought Uzziah to the throne. And Zechariah, the son of Jeroboam, he was the priest. So they were two very important people. He didn't want a lot of nonsense going around the place as to whether this was or wasn't his child. He was downrightly making it clear that this was his child and this was the name that was given by God. So listen to what is being said. Everybody, listen to what is being said, because this is a place where it could be recorded and people could witness it. I'd like to turn to a passage in the 2nd of Kings, chapter 16. I find this passage really helpful. It drops the background down and you can see just how tragic the whole scene is. It's the 2nd of Chronicles, 2nd of Kings, chapter 16. We're in Ahaz's period of time, and just to give you some idea of how difficult it was for the truth, we read in verse 10, this is an amazing piece of history, amazing piece of history, and it just shows you exactly what Ahaz is up to. He is nobody's good choice. King Ahaz, king of Judah, went to Damascus, which is the capital of the Syrians. What's he doing visiting this foreign country? Ahaz went to Damascus to meet Tiglath-Pileser, king of Assyria. That's why he went. He was going to make a joint meeting at that place, so halfway between the two, Jerusalem and Syria, and they could meet there, and Tiglath-Pileser would come down from Assyria. So already the Gentile power is being encouraged, not just by the northern kingdom, but this scoundrel, he's getting himself involved in it. He doesn't need to be involved at all. But so much is he contrary to the principles of his own people. He is the king, but he's working against that kingdom and now making a nice little meeting with Tiglath-Pileser, who's king of Assyria, the fear of every person. And it says that he saw an altar that was at Damascus, which was sort of the mutual meeting point, and King Ahaz sent to Urijah the priest. That, I think, is the person that we read about in the other chapter, in chapter 7. Sent Urijah the priest the fashion of the altar and the pattern of it. There's an altar that was at Damascus, and Ahaz is so impressed by this altar that he gets all the dimensions and sizes and details about it according to all the workmanship thereof. He had the whole plans on it. And it must have been really quite a big thing for him to do that. Now, what an absolute fool, if I could say so, is Ahaz. There's just nothing about that that's creditable, is there? It's not his own people by a long shot. Of all the Gentiles, Assyria is the worst of the lot. And he's now gone up there to have a meeting. What agenda could he possibly have? Who asked him to go up there? Hasn't he got 1,000 things to do in Israel, in Judah? Isn't Judah getting a punishing left, right and centre? Why doesn't he stay home and build up his own place? No, he's having a holiday. No, it's a matter of improving his image in the world. So verse 11, and Urijah the priest built an altar in Damascus according to all that King Ahaz had sent from Damascus. So he sent all those plans down to Jerusalem, and verse 11 continuing, so Urijah the priest made it against King Ahaz came from Damascus. In other words, before he returned home, he had the thing made. And when the king was come from Damascus, the king saw the altar, and the king approached to the altar and offered thereon. Is he the high priest? Has he got anything to do with it? You just cannot index the evil of that man. He is I would call him an absolute fool. And when the king was come from Damascus, he saw the altar, and the king approached to the altar and offered thereon. How can he more disdain the principles of Judah and of the Bible which they had? And he burnt his burnt offering. He burnt it like as if he were priest, and his meal offering, and poured out his drink offerings, and sprinkling the blood of the peace offerings upon the altar. This false altar that had nothing to do with the law that God had given them. And he brought also the brazen altar which was before Yahweh from the forefront of the house, from between the altar and the house of the Lord, and put it on the north side of the altar. Arrogance like you wouldn't believe. And King Ahaz commanded Urijah the priest, saying, upon the great altar, burn the morning burnt offering, replace what you had under the Mosaic institution, and use this great altar that's come foreign to the country. And the evening meat offering, end of verse 15, and the king's burnt sacrifice and his meat offering, with the burnt offering of all the people of the land, and their meat offerings and their drink offerings, and sprinkle upon it all the blood of the burnt offering and all the blood of the sacrifice, and the brazen altar shall be for me to inquire by. Now that's a very elongated description, isn't it? But what it's trying to tell us is that this man is totally unreliable. He just makes up religion, out of his pocket almost, as it were, on a holiday. And he was prepared to do that. Now, that's an important story, because you take that back and you bring that back to Judah, and you can see what Judah's running for, or what she's being dictated for. They have a very, very evil king, and he's just doing rampantly whatever he wants to do. He's replaced the law of Moses, and wherever he feels so disdain to do, that's just what he does. I think that the story is very important in our understanding of it, because it throws a background that otherwise you and I would never get it. We would never see it quite like it really was, with all that detail. And to think that he did those things, that's just, 1 month's work, so to speak, or 1 month's interference with the things of God. Judah is in an utter mess. That's what it means. The leadership is completely void of faithful principles. And if you bring that picture of 2 Kings 16 and put that behind this Isaiah 7 and 8, it helps a great deal. Because you can see that Isaiah's really got it all against him. He's a very faithful, wonderful servant of God, but the leadership of the country is in the hands of Ahaz, and he's got to kind of live with that. So 2 Kings chapter 16, just slip it, as it were, behind the record of Isaiah 7 and 8, and it really, really makes the thing easier to understand. So in verse 4, "For before the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria." In other words, this child that is to be born will not be able to have said, father and mother before a calamity. The calamity is the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. In other words, the king of Assyria is coming and he will mete out the justice that was appropriate. Now you can see that the prophet had a very, very difficult time. He wasn't there when everybody wanted to have a Bible school and everybody wanted to have a Bible class and the Sunday schools were all rattling along really well. He was there when Israel was at the bottom of the pot. And that reading back there really helps. It's only just another king on, Hezekiah, and the whole thing will change. And he'll have, when he's 25 years of age, he will begin his reign. But this is how it was before, and I find that extremely helpful to the overall impression. So, those two kingdoms, Damascus and Samaria, they are going to be taken away before the king of Assyria. You played around with Assyria, you got up there and had a little picnic with him, had a nice little holiday with this foreign king. Well, you've called him and he's coming. Assyria is therefore going to come down and measure out justice. So that confirms what we had in those latter verses of chapter 7. In verse 5 then, we learn of God's words to the prophet. Yahweh spake also unto me again, saying, for as much as this people, now you'll notice that he's addressing himself to the people, whereas before in chapter 7, it was really to the leaders of the place. But now, verse 6, it's for as much as this people. Where else can you see that in the chapter? Verse 9, associate yourselves, O ye people. It's addressed to the common people. Verse 11, last verse of verse 11. And again in chapter 12, verse 12, and line 2, this people. So this message then, that's coming from verse 5 onwards, is not between the dignitaries of the country, but it's a message that is going to all the people. You see, the people were corrupted. If you had a king like that, imagine what the priesthood was like. Imagine what the whole system was like. Chaos. But the people were running along with it. And that's what the tragedy and lesson is of Isaiah chapter 8. Now therefore, verse 7, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, great waters. What waters? Well, it's not waters he's talking about actually. It's about the king of Assyria, and he gets repeated mention through this section. The thing has focused now not just on a foreign kingdom like Syria, but a great kingdom, the greatest kingdom that was at that time. And its leader was known for his remarkable achievements. Now therefore, behold, the Lord bringeth up upon them the waters of the river, strong and many, even the king of Assyria. So you can see that you've got to read it right, don't you? It's put it in that colourful way, but it's to describe the king of Assyria. Why would they be described like that? Well, there's two great big waters that run through the Middle East there. One is the Tigris, running to the Arabian Gulf, and the other one is the Tigris River, the Euphrates that's south of the Tigris. But they meet down here before they go into the sea. And they are great rivers and very significant rivers. And the land that is between the two is very rich. I wanted to bring some evidence of that tonight, but I wasn't able to find the time just to get the book I want. But the land is very, very good. Mesopotamia means between rivers, Mesopotamia. And it's very good country. I can remember reading in this little book that the soil in the world, in the soils around the Tigris, the Euphrates River, had a yield of some 400. And I remember what the Lord said in his parable, and the highest figure that he mentioned was 100. And this book, was a worthy book, but it said there had been crops of wheat in that country was so rich that it was 400. So very good country, big rivers, plenty of water, plenty of growth. And they were confident. At this time now, they were running the world. And Tiglath-Pileser is the leader of the country. So they're characterised as being great waters of the river. And then he, in his language, he slips it from being a water or a river, and he says, and all his glory. So he's talking about the king of Assyria. And he was the most famous king in the world at that stage, without a doubt. And he's saying in verse 7, therefore, that the power of Assyria, with all his glory, see how it's coloured in, and he shall come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. In other words, Assyria is going to burst out of its normal occupation where it was inhabiting, and it's going to go spreading all over the countries in free abandon, doing whatever it wants to do. A bit like some of the rain today. It was quite remarkable, wasn't it? Just filling up the gutters as quick as they were emptied. And it says in verse 8, and this is the tragic note, and he shall pass through Judah. You see, before it was a contest between the northern tribes and Syria being confederate together, one a Gentile and one an Israelite nation. But you can see now in verse 8 that Judah is bearing the responsibility as well. Note that, because that's the facts, isn't it? We can see that Ahaz's effect upon Judah has been very, very poor indeed. So this king of Assyria, with all of his hordes, is going to come out of his rivers, as it were, from the area of Mesopotamia. He's going to spill all over the land, not just to come to Damascus, but to come as far as Judah, verse 8, and he shall pass through Judah. He shall overflow and go over. He shall reach even to the neck, and the stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land. O Emmanuel. How do you read that? It's not easy to read, is it? What's Emmanuel on the end of it for? Emmanuel means God with us. You'll see it at the end of verse 10. God is with us. That's Emmanuel. But let's read it again then. it says that he will overflow and go over and reach even to the neck. Well, you know, once the water comes up to your neck, it's getting pretty serious, isn't it? Go a bit further and the person's out. So this is a very serious indication that the invasion of Assyria is going to spread through the land. And it might almost take the life of Judah. That's what it's saying in its special manner of saying it. Come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. He's just ruling the place, isn't it? And this is a man that Ahaz wanted to have a little dealings with. And now he's having some dealings with him, all right? He's promised that Assyria is coming not as far as Syria, but as far as Judah itself. The stretching out of his wings shall fill the breadth of the land. It's just an expression speaking about his powers, the extent of his wings. We've got similar expressions to that in Daniel chapter 7 and other places as well, where that stretching out of the wings is like a country that's extending its influence in a wide way. But how then, at the end of the verse, can you say Emmanuel? Tiglath-Pileser's not Emmanuel, is he? So it's quite a challenge. Well, it's the same Emmanuel that gave the promise of that child in 7 verse 14. A virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. It will be God's child. The same influence, the same power is going to bring Assyria over Judah. And so in that quite difficult way, perhaps it is at the beginning anyway, when you were trying to get the sense of it, stretching out his wings shall fill the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. God will be in the matter. This is not a statement of the ability of the Assyrians. It's a statement of Emmanuel, God with us. And I should think a lot of the brothers and sisters at that time would have thought, oh, but you know, how can that be seen as God's work? What God is impressing them with is that he can give promises of good, as in the promise of his own child born among them. Or if they would fool around about that, then he can bring Assyria by the same power. He can control that as well. Do you feel happy with that? I think that's the sense of it, but you have to think about it, don't you? You can't have God for one thing and then refuse him for another. Ahaz will do as he sees he has to do.
Right. Is there any chance that this reference to Emmanuel here may be referring to Maher-shalal-hash-baz? I.e. the principle of the name Maher-shalal-hash-baz is similar to Emmanuel, not exactly the same, but is there any possibility that perhaps
It's tough.
he's just put it forward
Yeah.
here, you know, Maher-shalal-hash-baz, and then he speaks to the land, so to speak, in that same context. Just wondering if there might be a link.
Well, I think the sense, though, of Maher-shalal-hash-baz is a different sense, isn't it? And I find it hard to sort of mix them up together. If you can tell me how to do that, I'd be interested. But it would be on different sort of lines of thought, wouldn't it? Maher-shalal-hash-baz has got a meaning, and we see that worked into the context here. And Emmanuel's got its meaning. Emmanuel, of course, is at the end of verse 10 as well. Let's get down then to verse 9 and 10 and see how that little bracket just completes itself. So verse 7 says that God is going to allow Assyria to come over their land and virtually do what he wants to. It will be a terrible overflowing of cruel Assyrian behaviour. So verse 9, reading their disappointment, God says, associate yourselves, O ye peoples, it's plural, and ye shall be broken in pieces. You see, they've made a covenant, they've made an agreement. Assyria is coming down, she doesn't think she's necessarily not wanted. There seems to be something between them. Associate yourselves, O ye peoples. Assyria's in the picture. And Ahaz accepts anybody and anything. He's prepared to cooperate with that. Or the sentiments are not necessarily against it. Associate yourselves, O ye peoples, and ye shall be broken in pieces. There will be no security in making agreements with other foreign powers, even if it's Great Assyria. You might make these associations and make all these arrangements, but it will never be successful. Ye shall be broken in pieces. And give ear, all ye of far countries. The message that God is giving is for all other countries, whether it's Syria, Assyria, or wherever else it might be, that think they can come and make agreements with Judah and it will be okay with the God of Judah. It isn't. Gird yourselves, and ye shall be broken. In other words, gird yourselves for action and so on, but whatever you work out, it won't work because Emmanuel's not behind it. And ye shall be broken in pieces. Gird yourselves again, he says. That is for war and for activity, and you shall be broken in pieces. Well, you can't miss that, can you? You think you're going to make up agreements and alliances with foreign powers? Now, I think, my dear brothers and sisters, that helps us to see just how desperate the situation was for Isaiah. Very, very, very difficult. The public had been corrupted because of Ahaz. You might have guessed that would have been the case, but it is the case, isn't it? Here's the sympathies of the people on the wrong side of the issue. And Ahaz is still there, still trying to have little meetings with foreign powers and to increase his influence. And God has come right in his path and said, you made a fool of my opportunity to you, then Syria's coming. And it's my plan, not yours. Take counsel together, verse 10. God's having a chip that they're having counsels all the time about what relationships they're going to have. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, that is like in conference, it shall not stand. For Emmanuel. See, that does fit in well with the meaning of Emmanuel, doesn't it? I think it does. Yeah. Is that clear enough? But we have to really think it through, don't we? All right, verse 10. Take counsel together, and it shall come to naught. Speak the word, and it shall not stand. For God is with us. This people have forgotten the God of Israel and forgotten his allegiances with them. And they're just on a free fling, and they've got a very foolish king. You know, there's a chapter in Chronicles, it's called the 2nd Chronicles chapter 28, and it's all about Ahaz. And the whole chapter is utter disaster. I haven't added up the number of disasters mentioned in that one chapter, but it must be something like 10 or 12 of them. And there's just one after the other, and the whole chapter is a chapter written all about Ahaz and his complete failure. That's how tragic it was. Would you like to be a prophet? When the public interest in the word of God has slipped so low as that, That's Isaiah's burden. I really found that very, very helpful. I never had that understanding of his background. You know, he's Isaiah. He can speak whatever he wants to say, as it were. But my dear brothers and sisters, Isaiah's life was a nightmare, really. We see it, of course, very much in Jeremiah, don't we? We often say what a terrible life he had, fighting all these enemies of the truth. But Isaiah had a very difficult run. But gradually you can see it coming out of the record. Are there any other questions? Because I appreciate that question. And I want to make sure everybody's getting the gist of it. Be happy with where we're going. All right. We're into verse 11 then. For Yahweh spake thus to me with a strong hand, and instructed me that I should not walk in the way of this people. See, that's on the same line, isn't it? Isaiah is under terrible pressure, and God has spoken to him with a strong hand. What a comforting thing that was. Feeling almost isolated in the middle of his own people. And Yahweh spake thus to me with a strong hand. How can you speak with a strong hand? He obviously put his arm, as it were, around the prophet and comforted him to strengthen him in the right cause. This is really helping us to see what sort of man Isaiah was and the tremendous burden that he had. Say ye not a confederacy to all them to whom this people say a confederacy. They're mad on confederacies and another allegiance and another tie-up, and it's all outside the truth. It's like ecclesial life when it goes mad. And people come up with all sorts of crazy ideas and they begin to depart from the faith, and the prophet was trying to keep them back on the right track. We know something about that. We know quite a bit about it in recent times. But people get off track and they can drag other people off track until eventually it's extremely discouraging to try and keep the nose of things going in the right direction. Well, Isaiah's in fraternity with yourselves. If you experienced that, so did Isaiah. So have all men, I think. All men of God have experienced that very great challenge to their convictions. So God says, don't you do what the people are doing. A confederacy to all them to whom this people say a confederacy. No, that's not your line. That's not where we're going. Fear ye their fear, nor be afraid. So the prophet was encouraged to be in his own independence with what God is doing with him. Then look at verse 13, beautiful verse. Sanctify Yahweh of hosts himself. In all your worries, Isaiah, in all the things that are not going right in the direction of the nation, sanctify Yahweh of hosts himself. Keep your mind on where God is and what he's doing and proceed with it. That's beautiful. I think that's very beautiful. And let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. That's all right when everybody's in agreement with you. The whole meeting or the whole ecclesial world is going along your way. But when you can see that that's not the case, and it's one man here, isn't it? Sanctify Yahweh of hosts, therefore, and let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. And he shall be for a sanctuary, but for a stone of stumbling, and for a rock of offence to both the houses of Israel, for a gin and for a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. In other words, things were really bad. Even in Jerusalem itself, there was much evil in the inhabitants, and the truth was being turned away from. And he says, Yahweh, however, can be for you a sanctuary. but a stone of stumbling and for a rock of offence to both the houses of Israel. So never mind what they concoct and build up as ideas for the future. You stay by me, Isaiah. You stay by me and sanctify what I've said to you. Sanctify the Lord in your heart and you'll come through with it all right. Isn't that? That's a very beautiful verse. I must admit, I've never read that for the power that it is. It shows God's interest in the prophet. Verse 15, and many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken, which is fulfilling the experiences of verse 9, isn't it? Same language. Many among them shall stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken. Isaiah, bind up the testimony. Seal the law among my disciples. They're still there? Many of them? It's pretty lonely. He feels alone. Bind up the testimony. Seal the law among my disciples. You know, I think verse 16 is something for all of us in this present era. That's how we should be thinking. As we see that things are in calamity in our society, you can hardly even see the word God in the paper for week after week after week. They wouldn't dare put it in. Godless world. The lesson for us is bind up the testimony among our children. That's what it is to us. Don't let them go. Teach them what is right and stand by it. Stand by that testimony. You know, on Saturday, one of the things that really impressed me was this. We heard a lot of things about the papacy, about Russia and about Israel, those three. And I thought, going home, I thought, you know, the great majority of what I heard, I really knew when I was, say, in my mid-teens. I think you learn a lot in your mid-teens, don't you? And then I thought, oh yeah, but what about Brother Thomas? Who did he have to put it all right for him? Because 75% of what was said on Saturday could have been said was said, written down. Not in all the coloured work and so forth that we have today. But he wrote it. Those three brethren didn't get up there and give us a new edition. They told us what the scriptures were teaching on those three facets. And they're exactly right. Bind up the testimony, my dear brothers and sisters. That's the word for us. Don't yield. Don't collapse. Don't make no other allegiances. Go off the tangent. Stay where we are and be thankful that God has given us that blessing. That's how I felt at the end of the day. I thought, we have so much to be thankful for. And we must pass that on to our children. Their lives are not going to be easy in all respects. They're coming in a different generation. But we are all parents or grandparents. As I learned again, great-grandparent. I heard I was today. Phil, how's that? Not that it happened today, but we met the little fellow. But we are very blessed to be able to have what we have together, and this lesson here is telling us to hold on to that. And I think that's a very wonderful lesson. Let's glance down through the corridor of this second section. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples. Seal it. Don't play with it. Teach it firmly, warmly, embracingly. Help our children to love it. And I will wait upon Yahweh that hideth his face from the house of Jacob, and I will look for him. Jacob was obviously on a rampage, led by a very, very evil man as king. He hideth therefore his face from the house of Jacob, and in a different disposition, the prophet says, I will look for him. I will look for God. They're not looking for God. I will look for God. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from Yahweh of hosts, which dwelleth in Mount Zion. Just keep a finger there and come through to Hebrews chapter 2. And in verse 13, and again I will put my trust in him. Do you want to go back one verse more? He's not ashamed to call them brethren, into verse 11, saying, I will declare thy name unto my brethren. In the midst of the ecclesia will I sing praise unto thee. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children which God hath given me. Where's that from? That's from our chapter, isn't it? I find that very interesting, quite remarkable. There's a very doctrinal section there, very doctrinal. But Peter, who's living in an era that was similar in ways to what we're in, he asserts this very passage that we have in Isaiah chapter 8. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from Yahweh of hosts. Is it not because Peter was under terrible pressure? The Romans were getting ready to descend upon the promised land. AD 70 was just a very short time away. What do you think was happening to the ecclesias? You wouldn't need to guess, would you? Of course it did. They were troubled by what they saw, very troubled. And Isaiah has become a book that he quoted from. You know, there's other references where he quotes from Isaiah, which is interesting, isn't it? I find that really interesting. Because he was in a troubled situation. How could he keep it all together as AD 70 became harder and harder upon them, and the legions of Rome turned the top of the hill, and down the coast they came into the land of promise? What could the ecclesias do? What could Peter do in those circumstances? And yet he thought of that passage. Isn't that remarkable? Behold, I and the children that God hath given me. They both had messages that came with their names. Son of my right hand, and this other one, which meant that it was a matter of stating firmly and powerfully what God has said. And I suppose this book became an encouragement to the prophet or to the apostle. Isaiah's case, his circumstances in life, had lots of echoes to what Peter would have gone through. It must have been chaos as AD 70 fell upon our ecclesias in those times. And there's Peter. He's just a man, isn't he? He's got no material powers or organisation. He's going to be put to death because of his allegiance. Well, he's one of our friends. We stand with him. And we don't find that easy because our lives are just so much more comfortable. But my dear brothers and sisters, it encourages us if in his circumstances, with so little, he could find great cheer of heart in the prophet Isaiah, and liberally quoted as he's writing this letter to the ecclesias at that time. There's an inspiration to all of us to use our Bibles and know them, and to encourage each other as we're going along. Behold, I and the children whom Yahweh hath given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel from Yahweh of hosts, who dwells in Mount Zion. Just to finish the run of the chapter then. And when they shall say unto you, seek unto them that have familiar spirits. Hey, where's this coming from? This obviously was what was happening on the ground in Peter's, in not only the prophets' days, but also in Peter's day. Seek unto them that have familiar spirits and wizards that peep and that mutter. That's exactly what did happen. The apostasy came in on every side. And how did Peter push all that back? Wizards that peep and that mutter. The apostasy was bearing in hard and all sorts of doctrines were coming out. And his strengths were failing and he had to try and keep that ecclesia together. My dear brothers and sisters, that is just where we are, exactly where we are. And what comes to us from all of that is we should be really encouraging each other in the right cause. And the children that run between us here in our hall and that we know and love, take an interest in them. They're yours, they're ours, they're our ecclesias. There might be even far worse things ahead. But the prophet found his encouragement from words like that. What does it say again in verse 20? To the law and to the testimony. Stay by it. Don't change it. To the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. And they shall pass through it hardly bestead and hungry, and shall come to pass that when they shall be hungry, they shall fret themselves and curse their king and their God and look upward. When the calamity comes, people will finally find their God again. It's our responsibility to be fully alive to the great blessings that we enjoy together. Well, I didn't think that's an easy chapter, but I hope it's made some help in your understanding of it. Thank you.
Well, thanks to Brother Brian for his very encouraging words to us. His comment there about the papers not containing the name of God for weeks and weeks and weeks. I was listening to the ABC this afternoon, and they're very concerned about the lack of good news that there is in Australia. And so they're starting a campaign called Brighter News to help people feel a bit more positive about news and still keep it relevant. And it made me think, it's just amazing how they don't even see the term good news in our culture came from the scriptures, and they're just so removed from the things of God that they can't even see that there is good news available to people, and that everything that we see happening around us is all part of that. And so it's perhaps something for us to think about as there is an opportunity in our Sunday nights and seminars and what have you, to pass on that good news to those around us. So announcements as far as this coming week are, as he quickly looks up for the email that Brother Dan very kindly sent round. Sunday, Brother Peter Pullman is to exhort, and Brother Tony Lyons is to give the address in the evening. There is Brighton Youth Group here at the hall on Friday night at 8 o'clock, and an SYP outing on the Saturday afternoon at 4. Sunday school is on, and I believe that's all that we do cover off at this point in time. So let's bring our evening to a conclusion. Brother Merv will come forward and give thanks for supper and to close our night. So we'll read the words of hymn 196, and then Brother John will play that as our closing voluntary. So hymn 196, The race that long in darkness sat have seen a glorious light. The people dwell in day who dwelt in death's surrounding night. To hail the rise of that bright sun, the gathering nations come with joy as when reapers bear the harvest treasures home. To us a child of hope is born, to us a son is given. Him shall the tribes of earth obey, him all the hosts of heaven. His name shall be the Prince of Peace, forevermore adored, the wonderful, the Counsellor, the great and mighty Lord. His power increasing shall spread, his reign no end shall know, his throne and love shall justice guard, and peace the nations know. So if you'd like to stand, we'll ask Brother Merv to come forward and close with prayer.
Yahweh, our merciful Heavenly Father, we come now before Thee, the great God of heaven, the maker of all things, to give thanks unto Thee for this time we have had considering Thy word of truth. Indeed, to look at that wonderful prophecy of Emmanuel, the one who indeed is the child given and the son born, and the government will be upon his shoulder. And so we long for that time, Heavenly Father, when Thy kingdom shall be established, when all peoples, and particularly Israel, Thine own people, shall acknowledge Thee and come up to Jerusalem to worship before Thee. We thank Thee, Heavenly Father, for all the blessings of life Thou dost give us, and we acknowledge now that Thou dost provide all things, and we thank Thee for these refreshments. So, Heavenly Father, be with us now as we depart and go to our homes. Watch over and keep us in Thy care until Thy Son returns. And we give thanks and praise unto Thee for all Thy mercy toward us through our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen.